Ladies and gentlemen, comedian, entertainer, Daniel Songer, now storyteller, Story Act 265, Colonization of the planet Mars.
Happy Easter! Hey, comedian, entertainer, Daniel Songer, back to tell you another story. And the Story Act 265, Colonization of the planet Mars. The story began with a boy named Dan. He played cowboy and Indians, but his top priority was to become an astronaut. Then came the day that Dan became Captain Dan and trained to be a pilot of the Space Cruiser 5. The mission was to colonize the planet Mars. The launch from Earth was ecstatic, and the journey into outer space reached an all-time high for the members of Space Cruiser 5. There were 2 men and 2 women that were given the training for this mission to Mars and start the first colonization. When Space Cruiser 5 reached the thrust pod cell fuel station, a so-called accident happened that blew up the thrust pod cell fuel station, and suddenly Captain Dan got blamed for the destruction of the thrust pod cell fuel station. As you might guess, Space Cruiser 5 never made it to Mars due to the fact that they ran out of fuel and were thought to be left for dead deep in space. Of course, a multi-billion-dollar rescue was on the way to save the Space Cruiser 5. Who cared about the 2 men and the 2 women? After all, it was Captain Dan who got blamed for the utter destruction of the thrust pod cell fuel station. For months and months, Space Cruiser 5 stood still in the Earth probe viewfinder. Finally, the crew of Space Cruiser 5 were rescued and brought back to Earth. The interrogation started with the 2 women, who quickly confessed that the orgy started as soon as we plunged into outer space. As you already know, it was Captain Dan who got blamed for the destruction of the thrust pod cell fuel station, so naturally they came looking for Captain Dan. Captain Dan knew he was going to be taken into custody, so he slipped out the back. Fact, make a new plan, Dan. You might need a decoy boy to set yourself free. So Captain Dan slipped out the back, only to be met with 2 stun guns. The previous version stun gun would vaporize you, so Captain Dan escaped. Slip away, slip away, slip away. To evade capture, Captain Dan went into a coliseum only to find the world-class swim team. Because of Captain Dan's physique and strength, he was immediately nominated to be the captain of the world-class swim team. The World Network televised the world-class swim team, and Captain Dan broke a world record in body language. He immediately became recognized of being the missing captain of Space Cruiser 5 who utterly destroyed the thrust pod cell fuel station, which made him the world's most wanted man. They swarmed the Colosseum, and Captain Dan was brought to justice. Scientists and engineers utilized the same design plan to build a new thrust pod cell fuel station so they could continue the mission to colonize the planet Mars. Suddenly, they discovered a flaw in the design, which caused the utter destruction of the thrust pod cell fuel station, and the news spread worldwide. Captain Dan was exonerated and promoted to Major Dan. Major Dan became a hero throughout the world. He's a hero! He's a hero! Major Dan, he's a hero! And let's not forget, he broke the world record in body language. Then came the countdown to a new launch date and a new Space Cruiser 5 led by Major Dan. And so it was written in a cloud formation across the sky, a word, and that word was love. And so it began again like deja vu. 2 men and 2 women trained to colonize the planet Mars. And as you already know from the testimony of the 2 women, the orgy started as soon as they plunged into outer space. Colonize, colonize in the name of love. The thrust pod cell fuel station catapulted Space Cruiser 5 to its final destination. And the seed of man bared fruit on the planet Mars. Major Dan became a legend of the planet Mars, and they sang, "He's a hero, he's a hero." Major Dan colonized the planet in the name of love. In the name of love. Writer Daniel R. Songer, Happy Easter, thank you. In the name of love.